The member for Port Adelaide.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I refer to my questions to the Prime Minister. I refer to the Prime Minister's answer to the member for Sydney. Is the Prime Minister aware that modelling in the Finkel report concludes that no new coal-fired power stations will be built under a clean energy target? And the Chief Scientist has said about new coal-fired power stations, and I quote, "It would be surprising if governments were to endorse a scheme that incentivised them." Does the Prime Minister agree with the Chief Scientist?
The Minister for Transport won't interject. The Minister for the Environment and
Thank you. I thank the member for Port Adelaide for his question, and he knows that Dr Finkel and his expert panel have produced a comprehensive report, and in that report their preference is for the clean energy target over the Labor Party's emissions intensity scheme, and the reason why is because it will lower prices more than an EIS would. And he also makes it very clear that when it comes to coal, under the clean energy target, it will stay in the system longer, and that by creating a level of regulatory certainty, you're more likely, as an existing coal operator, to be able to go to your financiers and get the money to do an upgrade or the maintenance that is required, Mr Speaker. Now, the Chief Scientist was asked, could a new coal-fired power station be built? And he said, absolutely, it's conceivable it could be built. And that is the key point. The market will determine these matters. But the Labor Party is in denial about the importance of coal as a form of baseline power. It might be surprising for them to know that in South Australia, when the Northern Power Station closed and you lost all the coal-fired power in South Australia, prices went up and the system became less stable, because the Premier of South Australia, Jay Weatherill, was conducting a big experiment. And in the member for Port Adelaide's own electorate, Adelaide-Brighton, employing 450 people, lost its power for 36 hours. So what does the member for Port Adelaide say to the 450 workers in his own electorate? He doesn't want to answer that question. He doesn't want to take responsibility for his left-wing caucus mate, the Premier of South Australia. Now, the reality is, under the Prime Minister's leadership, we have put storage front and centre on the government's agenda. Our announcement around Snowy Hydro 2.0, the work that the Australian National University is doing to map out other pumped hydro facilities throughout the country, what we did in Tasmania, and the work that we are doing there to investigate, again, hydro facilities and expansion in Tasmania, which will be of great help in providing a battery to the mainland. The work we're doing with ARENA and Cultana in South Australia, in the Upper Spencer Gulf. The work we're doing to create a virtual power plant throughout South Australia, 1,000 homes and businesses connected in order to provide battery storage. This is what the coalition is doing. Our primary objective is the stability of the system, so we don't see a repeat of the madness that occurred under the Labor Party. And our other key objective is affordability, because we, on this side of the House, care about jobs and investment, unlike the reckless Labor Party.
The member for Forrest.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Environment and Energy. Will the minister update the House on how the government is taking a technology-neutral approach to energy policy that will allow carbon capture and storage to play a bigger role in the transition to a lower emissions future? Is the minister aware of any obstacles?
The Minister for the Environment and Energy.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for Forrest for her question and know that she is very concerned about the future of industry in the southwest of her state. And she's concerned not only about the affordability of power, but also its sustainability and ensuring that it is low emissions technology. That is why she and other coalition members on this side of the House welcome our announcement that we are seeking to amend the legislation of the Clean Energy Finance Corporation to enable it to invest in carbon capture and storage. Because back in 2011-2012 there was a political fix, and the political fix was between the Labor Party and their alliance partners in the Greens, and they ruled out carbon capture and storage as one of the prohibited technologies that could be funded under the CEFC. This is despite the fact that the International Energy Agency says it's not optional when it comes to reducing emissions to rule out CCS. This is despite the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change saying the cost of meeting Paris commitments would be double if you didn't have CCS. This is despite the fact that you can get a 90% emissions reduction by using CCS, not just for thermal generation, gas and coal, but also importantly for industrial processes, chemicals, steel, cement. That's why the Coalition's announcement was welcomed by the likes of BHP, BlueScope, the Business Council of Australia, Energy Networks Australia, Shell, and indeed it was entirely consistent with the former comments of the member for Correa and the member for McMahon and the Leader of the Opposition in the Senate and the member for Lilly and indeed the member for Port Adelaide.
Members on my right.
Opposite had supported
Members on my
capture
right will
storage.
cease interjecting. The Manager of Opposition Business.
On your earlier ruling where you drew attention to all interjections being disorderly and about members being referred to on by their title, the Treasurer has just done the exact same thing
The Manager
in
of Opposition
defiance of your
Business will
ruling, and he
resume
knows
his
he's
seat.
in defiance.
I just urge the Manager of Opposition Business, if he'd like, given it's Thursday and with 5 minutes to go, to perhaps just with respect review everything I said when I addressed his last point of order. But I do again say to members interjecting, all interjections are disorderly and they should bear that in mind, particularly when it comes to referring to members by their correct titles. The Minister has the call.
So the Labor Party went to the Australian people in 2016 ahead of the election with a specific policy proposal which was to broaden the investment of the CEFC. The member for Port Adelaide went to the Press Club and said he wanted to get rid of the ridiculous restrictions on the mandate of the CEFC. So you can imagine our surprise when the Labor Party announced that it would not support our legislative change to the CEFC. So we know that the Labor Party will say one thing: it doesn't matter if it's on company tax, it doesn't matter if it's on the Medicare levy, it doesn't matter if it's on Gonski school funding, and now it doesn't matter if it's on energy policy. They will say one thing to the Australian people and do another thing in this place, Mr Speaker. We all know on this side of the House, when it comes to hypocrisy, thy name is Labor.
The member for Port Adelaide.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. The Finkel review concluded that a clean energy target accompanied by other reforms would lower prices, lower emissions and ensure reliability without new coal power stations. But it's reported today that the government's considering throwing more than $1 billion of taxpayers' money at a new coal-fired power station. How can the Prime Minister possibly justify throwing $1 billion of taxpayers' money at a new coal-fired power station?
The Minister for Energy and the Environment.
Well, we know that the member for Lilly supports coal because he commissioned a report into a new coal-fired power station in northern Queensland. The member for Lilly, the second most famous boy to come out of Nambour High, Mr Speaker, the second most famous graduate out of Nambour High, he commissioned the Treasurer of the Millennia, the Treasurer of the Millennia, and Euromoney's Treasurer of the Year. Mr Speaker, the reality is, when it comes to coal, it's a critical part of our energy mix. And the Leader of the Opposition said this in 2007. We believe completely that coal is part of Australia's energy future. We also need to be at the forefront of ensuring that the processes which we adopt to use coal are as clean and as efficient as can possibly be made, Mr Speaker. So the reality is, under the Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull, we want an energy mix which is technology neutral, which is focused on the trilemma of affordability, stability and meeting our international commitments. Only we on this side of the House can do that, and only Labor will drive up electricity prices and lead to a more unstable electricity system.